Hi, and welcome everyone to this webinar for the Semel Institute at UCLA Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Grand Rounds, sorry. My name is Karen Dinan. I'm a professor of the practice in the Department of Economics at Harvard University and at the Harvard Kennedy School. I'm thrilled to be here today to introduce my former student, Dr. Franco Pillsbury, and to serve as the discussant for her presentation. Let me just give you a few words about Franco for those of you who don't know her. She grew up in Ventura County, California, where she loved reading, singing, and giving her older brothers math lessons. She earned her BA in philosophy at UC Berkeley, followed by a master's in business and science from the Claremont colleges. She went on to medical school at USC, where she served as class president and launched a mental health awareness initiative in response to a campus tragedy. During med school, Franco was awarded a scholarship to pursue a master's in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, which is how I came to know her. And she completed her general psychiatric residency at NYU during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and is now back in California for this fellowship at UCLA. And along the way, she's had various other incredible milestones, being an APA Leadership Fellow, serving as the Western Regional Chair for the AAMC's Organization of Student Representatives. That's all the stuff you can find in Franco's formal biography, but I just want to say on a personal note, Franco was one of the very first students that I taught when I joined Harvard, and she's still one of my favorite students. That might seem kind of surprising given that macroeconomics, which is what I teach, and psychiatry are pretty far apart. But really, the students I enjoy teaching most are those who bring fresh perspectives into the classroom. And Franco did that every time she showed up. And those who are generally motivated to use what they learned to make the world a better place. And Franca was exactly this sort of student, as you'll see from her presentation and my discussant. She's been connecting the dots between her world and my world in powerful and thoughtful ways. So I'm going to hand it over to Franco to present in a minute. I just want to say the way this is going to work is Franco will present. I'm going to do a short discussion, and then we will take Q&A. So feel free to put your questions as Franco is presenting or I'm discussing into the Q&A box. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to you, Franco.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Professor Diamond. All right, okay. So thank you all for being here. And thank you so much, Professor Dinan, for that kind intro. Today, we're going to be talking about Make Our Children Healthy Again, which is the MAHA report. We'll be exploring this report and trying to anticipate some of its potential effects on both the healthcare of children and really of all Americans. These, I'll say these images are from public domain. One is from photographer Arthur Ruthstein, who as part of the series A Sharecropper's Wife, and the other is from actually something that was called Documerica. Photographer John H. White was contracted through the Environmental Protections Agency, actually, that was contracting with a lot of photographers to document life in America in the 70s. And this is a photo of children playing outside of the Ida B. Wells projects in Chicago. So we're going to have a little bit of a rush since we're starting a little bit late, but nevertheless, I'd like to take a moment before we start just to have a moment of silence for everything that has been going on in our city downtown. Uh, I hope that despite all of that, you'll be able to turn your attention to this for the next 45 minutes or so. S- Because there's a plan that will be coming out in August based on this report on Make Our Children Healthy Again, or as I'll call it, sometimes MOCA. And this is a plan that's based on thoughts such as this quote, which says such pathologization may lead to interventions that fail to address root causes. Therapy and social emotional learning programs may weaken resilience by pathologizing normal emotions. Though controversial and disputed by many experts, this perspective remains viable and warrants rigorous scientific investigation. If this quote concerns you, uh, I'm glad you're here. I do have disclosures. They were put up before. There's been a slight edit, so I have a very minimal stock portfolio. But I'd forgotten it did include Pfizer and Amgen stock. It no longer includes Pfizer stock because I looked up what they make, and they are medications I do prescribe. So I divested in that for a whopping net gain of less than $200. And this is such an important thing in presentations, these disclosures. But I think for trainees, it also sort of misses the fact that a major financial motivator would be I guess, the immense amount of debt that I am in solely from medical school. So it's a bit of um, I think it misses a little bit of something for many trainees. Oh, and also any political views or opinions expressed herein are not, do not reflect the views of UCLA, UCLA Health, or the Department of Child Psychiatry. As a brief outline, I'm kind of going to skip this because for time's sake. So the educational objectives are to understand the recent Make America Healthy Again, MAHA executive order, and its subsequent assessment, Make Our Children Healthy Again, or MOCA, as I'll call it. We'll explore elements of the upcoming MAHA strategy or what might be in it, due to be released in August, and explore some broader implications of this political shift in focus. Limitations of this include that this presentation is an evaluation of a policy document. It provides a critique and questions, but minimal, if any, answers. There will be predictions discussed that are not intended to be taken as fact, but rather as considerations for further exploration of this topic. Oh, whoops. I have just blocked myself from, there we go. Um, Uh, there can be potential bias from my personal experiences, absolutely, and potential media and political bias, though I have tried to engage in looking at the news as little as possible about this, only as much as is required for engaging with families in our clinic centered on autism that have had a lot of worries. So here's what I think. Uh, the Make Our Children Healthy Again assessment, released on May 22nd, 2025, is an assessment of American healthcare that inaccurately claims to contain a comprehensive evaluation of the physical and emotional needs of America's children, and voices research and development priorities that raise numerous concerns for the mental health care of children in the United States, and really the mental and physical health care of really everyone. The report highlights some legitimate flaws inherent to the American medical system, but frequently cites irrelevant or false data to make its arguments, and demonstrates little understanding of mental health, scientific research methods, or statistics, or even often the way that the parts of HHS function. At times, it also oddly emphasizes its own deficits in reasoning. However, even with all of that, it is a vital document for anyone in child psychiatry or psychology to understand, as it offers a window into what might be changing and what we may need to prepare ourselves for. So, setting the stage with the executive order. What is an executive order? It's basically a big announcement from the president with orders to do something. It has the force of law, but isn't technically a law. Like it doesn't get written into law by Congress, and yet it does have significant force behind it. The Make America Healthy Again executive order was released on February 13th. It is one of 157 executive orders that President Trump has signed since his inauguration. Um, he did not invent executive orders. They have existed since George Washington, and there have been over 14,000 of them signed. But there was quite a flurry of them signed at the beginning of this Trump administration. The MAHA executive order creates a commission chaired by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The order proclaims that a childhood chronic disease crisis is occurring and voices the following concerns and priorities. It's concerned about autism diagnostic rates, ADHD diagnosis and treatment, the use of psychotropic medications in children, American diet and lifestyle, food production techniques, absorption of toxic materials, electromagnetic radiation, transparency and open source data is something that it says it really wants to prioritize. Critiquing current corporate influences and really kind of critiquing everybody. It takes a lot of, well, you'll see. Increasing private sector involvement in health data and tracking. The timeline of this executive order, it set out in the order, which was that uh, there should be a Make Our Children Healthy Again assessment that had to be delivered to the president within 100 days. And that did occur on May 22nd. There's 73 pages of the assessment that I'll summarize for you. And then the Make Our Children Healthy Again strategy is supposed to be presented within 180 days of the order, which will fall sometime in August. Uh, Interestingly, as we'll talk about a little bit more, the administration has requested in the fiscal year 2026 budget $500 million for this, and it's likely that the strategy is going to involve really a focus on research from what it seems like it's saying in the assessment. But the NIH is getting a slash to its budget if the if this is approved by $17.9 billion. The commission members are listed here, of course, chaired by Secretary Kennedy. Interestingly and unfortunately, so there are two physicians on it. Those are the individuals with the arrows next to their names, but there's no one, near as I can tell from reviewing their bios, with any significant clinical or other experience in mental health, children's mental health, medical care of children, or K through 12 education. Um, but there is a co-founder of the WWE, so Uh, so the assessment, this is what it looks like. Um, and let's dive into it. So, but before we get to the specifics of the sections, it's important to talk a little bit about how the document seems as a whole. So there's been an AI controversy. So this is part of the news that I did read, and I can, in reading the document, it makes so much sense. This is the Washington Post pointing out some examples of how the citations in it are evidence that a lot of this was generated in some way by AI. So on the left, it's pointing out the inclusion of the OAI site marker, which has since been deleted since the Washington Post came out with this. But it's a marker of that the fact that OpenAI has been used in collecting this research. On the right, an example of no article of that name appears in the Journal of Pediatrics. Another hallmark of AI chatbots is that they can hallucinate the names of studies. I found at least another one of these that it hallucinated the name of, but I didn't check all 522 citations. Uh, it also it's pointing out how basically a similar thing. There are other articles that have discussed this, but this particular article doesn't exist. Some other examples, it's showing on the left an article that's cited twice with two different authors, but it's the same article. On the right, a nearly identical article with the same lead author published in the journal that year, but not with the same co-authors. And the statistic that that is in the report is not actually uh, in this paper. Uh, Another example is a dead URL that hasn't existed since 2017 because AI has been trained on old data sets. Also, and this on the right, there's a quote in the citation, which is obviously not typical. Um, we'll skip these, but it's a similar, they paint a similar picture. And what I want to say is, um, in reviewing the document as a whole, it reads very strangely. I have not read other policy of the Trump administration, but I've read federal and state and local policy, and um, sometimes, sometimes it's very dry and your eyes kind of glaze over and it's hard to remember what the thesis was and to keep following what points they're making, but the policy still does that. This document doesn't. It sort of has thesis statements if you really try to search hard for them, but they're sort of embedded like random places within the sections. So it's a very hard document to really get a sense of what it's trying to say, because it doesn't seem to know. And I wonder if that is because it was all generated by AI, or if that reflects the fact that the commission that wrote this doesn't really know what it wants to say. And I don't have an answer for that. So MoCA's stated purpose, it does state this relatively clearly at the beginning, is a call to action. It presents a stark reality of America's children's declining health, backed by compelling data and long-term trends. It seeks to unpack the potential dietary, behavioral, medical, and environmental drivers behind the crisis. It wants to turn the tide and better protect our children. The United States, it says the United States must act decisively. During this administration, we will begin reversing the childhood chronic disease crisis by confronting its root causes, not just its symptoms. And it has 4 sections. That it thinks are the main drivers of this childhood chronic disease crisis: poor diet, aggregation of environmental chemicals, lack of physical activity, and chronic stress due to use of digital devices, and then over medicalization. Uh, to give you an example of the misleading rhetoric and confusing rhetoric, this is the first paragraph of the introduction. It says, the health of American children is in crisis. Despite outspending peer nations by more than double per capita on healthcare, the United States ranks last in life expectancy among high-income countries and suffers higher rates of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. Today's children are the sickest generation in American history in terms of chronic disease, and these preventable trends continue to worsen each year. by more than double per capita on healthcare. A little misleading. So this is the U.S. healthcare from a global perspective report that the Commonwealth Fund um, publishes every few years. Uh, MoCA cites the 2019 report, but there's been a subsequent one in 2022. So I'm citing the 2022 one at this moment. But basically, if you look at it, sure, that's sort of roughly true. Germany, so the US there is in about 12,000 if you add up the two components. And then Germany next to it is about 7,000, if I can see correctly. So it's an almost correct statistic, but it's not really correct. And then if you look at, so this was taken from the OECD health statistics of 2022, a different organization using the same data set must have been defining cost a little bit differently, but it shows the same number for the United States, but shows Switzerland at 9,000. You get the gist. So more than double per capita isn't accurate, but absolutely the US is an outlier. Absolutely. Um, Interestingly, though, 90% of personal healthcare spending in the US is on adults. So, okay. The United States ranks last in life expectancy in high income countries, yes. So this is from that same report. If you look, you can see the US on the right, far below, um, at a life expectancy average of 77 years. Okay. And suffers rates of obesity, higher rates of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. So here I went back to the report they actually cite, which is the older one. Sure, yes, this is found in that report. US adults have the highest chronic disease burden. Okay, all right. Today, but now we go to today's children are the sickest generation in American history. We weren't talking about the kids really. Um, but okay, the paper it's citing has data up to 2018, which it may be that these trends have continued. They probably have, but this is 7 years ago. So if you're telling me it's a crisis now, I want to see data from recently. Um, and it also says that goes on to say in 2023 alone, national health expenditures were projected to grow by 4.4%. No, if you check what it's saying, its source, it wasn't projected. It just says that in 2023, uh, expenditures grew, but by 7.5%. This is just one example of what is pervasive throughout the document. So section 1, we're going to have to speed through. So this is the one that talks about ultra processed foods. And basically, it doesn't really make an argument, but if you, I've tried to distill the apparent thesis, which is that ultra processed foods are harmful, but they may be even more harmful than we know from existing research, because there is existing research. So we need to focus a lot more on UPFs. It talks about UPF consumption growing. It says farmers are the backbone of America, so we should put whole foods they produce at the center of healthcare. Maybe, but that it doesn't make sense what it's saying. I don't know what it means. It talks about red 40 and being worried that that causes autism and ADHD. There's no mention of food deserts. If you're talking about ultra processed foods, you got to talk about where people can only buy those things and don't have access to more nutritious foods. And it does talk about at least the SNAP program, but it criticizes it heavily by implying that SNAP drives consumption of ultra processed foods and thus drives up healthcare costs. It also both alternately says that SNAP does and does not incentivize consumption of healthy foods, and it actually does. Similarly, it makes a confusing statement about the school lunch program, but WIC is the one thing it actually likes, the women, infant, and children's supplemental food program. Section 2 talks about the cumulative load of chemicals in our environments. Basically, it seems to be saying that children are often exposed to a complex mixture of chemicals. We should use AI and machine learning to better estimate these exposures and their effects, and then we must eliminate them. Um, I reviewed the study it cites, which is a paper in toxicology. I don't understand enough about AI and machine learning to be able to say whether this is a viable option. Um, but interestingly, it talks it takes a stab. So it's taken stabs at a lot of different entities, but here it takes a stab at our regulatory system, and it says this growth cannot happen in a European regulatory system that stifles growth. And I thought this was an important clause to include because I don't know what this means. So I my focus in business school was in the clinical and regulatory affairs of the pharmaceutical and biotech industries, and I gotta say, a lot of European regulation is sort of copies from American regulation. So, for example, it seems to either be taking a stab at the Food and Drug Administration or the Environmental Protection Agency, but both were founded well before the European equivalent. Um, so it's very confusing, and it 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 suggests that whoever wrote this doesn't really understand the entities contained within HHS. Um, Section 3 talks about the crisis of childhood behavior in the digital age. It does a lot of comparing our current state to like the 60s and 70s. So it says there's a decline of physical activity, decline of aerobic fitness, reduced walking and biking, etc. It also talks about psychosocial factors, it calls it, and mental health crisis. It talks about declining sleep and concerns about circadian rhythm, and the importance of light exposure and that being diminished with higher use of electronic devices. It also mentions chronic stress as being a factor affecting kids, so it doesn't really define what it means. And it talks about the loneliness epidemic, um, eh, j- insofar as to say that loneliness increases rates of depression and anxiety, which is true. Um, and it talks a little bit about potential negative impacts of social media on teens, but doesn't really quantify them in any way. Um, just because I figured some in the audience would really want some neuroscience slides at this time. I'll include a little bit of that. So, just talking about the loneliness epidemic, the literature is still having a significant difficulty quantifying all of this and assessing changes pre and post pandemic. And the literature mainly focuses on adults. But what we know about the neurobiology of loneliness is it involves some of these regions of the brain. The dorsomedial prefrontal cortex is implicated in mentalizing and being able to reflect on another person's emotional state. Um, the temporoparietal junction is implicated in theory of mind and being able to sort of imagine others' intentions. This is also important in loneliness. The visual cortex is also really key. Lonely people seem to have an increased perception of negative social stimuli, And tied into this, the ventral striatum is less activated uh, in individuals who are lonely by pictures of social situations. It's more compared to healthy controls, and it's more activated by pictures of like objects. Um, uh, for time, I'll skip this slide. Just so everyone knows, there is a UCLA loneliness scale, which is approved, is tested in teens and adults. And it was developed by a psychologist, Daniel Russell, while he was doing some research here before he finished his PhD. Um, I've I haven't had a chance to use it in my own clinical practice, but it's something that I want to consider doing to get maybe a little bit more of a boots on the ground understanding of what's happening, since we're also still struggling to figure out the implications of COVID-19 and things being not in person for kids for so long. So, and frustratingly, there's not, um, we don't yet know that much about what to do about loneliness. But in one meta-analysis, there were four primary strategies that it identified in studies: increasing opportunities for social connection, enhancing social support, improving social skills, and addressing maladaptive social cognition. And it was that one that seemed to have the biggest effect size. So for interventions that addressed this maladaptive social cognition, there was a reduction in loneliness of 0.58 on average, with a significant p-value. Okay, back to the actual policy. Um, so, Section 3 also talks about overdiagnosis as though it's widely accepted. It claims that there's overdiagnosis occurring in ADHD, depression, and anxiety, and it says overdiagnosis is most certain in ADHD. It cites a pediatrics article that concluded that overdiagnosis is occurring, and that in low severity ADHD, the diagnosis can be harmful. We can uh, One can compare and contrast this with an article by our very own Madeline Jansen that um, also looked at this problem and came came to a slightly different conclusion. That said, it's a little more nuanced than that. That increased recognition is partly, well, is a significant driver of this. And I can't fully summarize it for the sake of time, but um, the document then goes on to question the benefits versus harm of school-based mental health programs. And unsurprisingly, it touches on uh, nature exposure as benefiting children with mental diagnoses, and the government suppressing questioning around pediatric vaccine schedules. The next section, the final section about the over medicalization of our kids, says is built on a very flawed premise. It says this report is representative of examples of demonstrably harmful practices in children. A core principle of evidence-based medicine is that interventions shown to offer no benefit when compared to placebo are harmful, definitively. All medical interventions involve some risk of biological adverse events. Yes. Net harmfulness is understood by virtue of proven absence of benefit. This, especially in psychiatry, really doesn't make sense. it's not proven absence of benefit. It's that we can't prove that there is a benefit above placebo. But as we all know, A, that is an effect, and B, um, our standards for what we will actually say is statistically significantly different from placebo are high. And I wonder um if the commission or this mocha at least understands this. um it talks about proven harms due to overtreatment, proven harms of psychotropic meds in children, that like it's proven that we're overtreating because uh these can have serious side effects. Which is a statement that doesn't logically make sense, but is true that our medications do, of course, have very serious side effects potentially. Um, it really doubles down on saying like the withdrawal is terrible for all of these meds, often leading to disabling and prolonged physical dependence and withdrawal symptoms. Um, as all of us who prescribe psychotropics know that this is a bit of a an extreme statement. We manage tapering of these medications thoughtfully, and prolonged physical dependence. I think it must be referring to benzos, but I don't know. It also says that specific antipsychotics, I think it's talking about risperidone, compared to placebo, are 5 times more likely to cause gynecomastia. Well, I don't. Yeah, placebo I would not expect to cause gynecomastia, and there are more pyramidal side effects. It doesn't define what these are, as though it's common knowledge. Um, it also just completely attacks the DSM, and uh, attacks vaccines, saying that the manufacturers have major conflicts of interest. Um, I'll try to go into that if we have time. Well, so uh, in summary, the document I think does have some valid critiques. I mean, it highlights that our psychotropic medications do have particularly serious side effects, which I think none of us are. I think as a community, we're pretty transparent about that. It highlights, we didn't talk about this, issues with direct to consumer advertising, which uh, I have to say, it is troubling to me, that this exists in our country. We are the only one of 2 nations that has direct to consumer advertising, a- and it really it, it sends such a message of uh, the benefits of medications without really truly talking about the risks. Sure, they list them really quickly at the end, but i- it's not, I personally feel it's not fair to consumers. Um, and it does point out that ADHD is less clear cut than we kind of want it to be. It talks about the um, MTA study and the reviews, the subsequent sort of reviews of the MTA study, and how we are um, rethinking some of the story around ADHD. What's completely missing, no social determinants of health, No discussion of the leading causes of death in children, unintentional injury, homicide, or suicide rates. And it doesn't consider the availability of resources. And I mean, likely there's so much more. Um, quickly, uh, it concludes by the document concludes by basically giving us a sense of what might be in the strategy. Because it says these are its next steps. So it wants to address the replication crisis, which it doesn't actually talk about in the body of the report, but meaning like the difficulty of reproducing scientific studies and getting similar results. It says post-marketing surveillance. The NIH and FDA should build systems for real-world safety monitoring. This is very misleading. It makes it sound like these don't exist, but there are at least two well codified pathways within the FDA, including stage 4 of clinical trials. So prior to marketing, you have stages 0 through 3. But after the medication goes out into the world, stage 4 collects further data about its efficacy and its safety. And then additionally, you have risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, or REMS. And the audience may be familiar with the clozapine REMS, which was recently phased out. But REMS are used for multiple drugs. If there's something concerning like clozapine's um, penchant for neutropenia. Talks about, it says a real world platform that it wants to center on autism, like data collection and integration into EMRs. It wants to use AI to surveillance in the toxicology realm. And it wants to fund independent studies evaluating the health impact of GRAS food ingredients. It never uses that acronym in the body of the document. It doesn't even talk about what I presume it means, which is generally recognized as safe food ingredients. Uh, the final 5 that it outlines are going to be these research and implementation priorities are long-term nutrition trials on ultra-processed foods, launching a coordinated national lifestyle medicine initiative, uh, doing more drug safety research to look at long-term neurodevelopmental and metabolic influences of psychotropic drugs in the pediatric population, and alternative testing models, this organ on a chip. It never talks about this in the report. And then the last, it does talk about precision toxicology, but this is outlining that it wants to launch a national initiative to map gene environment interactions affecting childhood disease. It never talks about gene environment interactions. Um, so it just doesn't support its conclusions. Um, predictions on strategy. Uh, there are a number of things that I think could come our way in August. Um, but I'll skip to the most serious one, which is I alluded to this earlier. So Make America Healthy Again is being given a budget of, or they're requesting a budget of $500 million. But everything else that they're requesting a change on within HHS is a cut, reduction, or consolidation. MAHA is the only thing that is getting extra money, and it's $500 million. But looking below, you've got a cut of roughly $4 billion Another $1.7 billion. The CDC one is interesting. So $3.5 billion. It says the budget focuses CDC's mission on core activities such as such as emerging and infectious disease surveillance. Um, the last line, specifically, the budget proposes consolidating funding for infectious disease and opioids, viral hepatitis, sexually transmitted infections, and tuberculosis programs into one grant program for $300 million. I don't know how much all of those things individually were allocated, but I have a guess it's a lot more than $300 million. Um, Perhaps the most pivotal one, because Maha Mocha is talking about being this major research innovation to find all of these dangers we haven't really fully understood. Uh, and there's going to be a cut of $17.9 billion if this gets approved from NIH. If you read the text of this, it is just lambasting NIH about, like sort of blaming it for COVID, which is very bizarre. And I'll just leave you with one last one. CMS um, getting slashed, if this goes through, by $670 million. Um, The budget eliminates funding that had been used to carry out non-statutory, wasteful, and woke activities while eliminating funding for core Medicare and Medicaid operations. It, I, I don't know. Professor Dinan will have more insight on this, but this doesn't read like a budget to me. This reads like a, a hate letter. um, so I don't really have time to get into this, but uh, it makes me question, how did we get here? Because this is something that has Mocha and the Maha project, um, while they are being carried out by individuals, they have their roots in things that do appeal to swaths of the public. And if we're going to try to bring some more reason to what's about to happen to our healthcare system, um, we have to understand where this message gets its appeal. And I, I think it's in the fact that it seems like people have gotten this message that medicine is magic. Um, and, and there are elements of it that absolutely are magic. I mean, the the banding together of so many people during the height of COVID to deliver a vaccine so quickly. I mean, that is communal magic. But eh, the day to day of medicine is hard, and there are risks and benefits, which we all talk about in individual patient interactions. But what can our individual uh, statements do if the system that we're working in is working against that message? Um, so uh, anyway, with that, I'd love to turn it over to Professor Dinan.
Sure. Good. So Franco, uh, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss your analysis. I know we're short on time, so I will try to be quick with my remarks so we can allow some time for Q&A. But I wanted to say that I want to start by saying that I found many of your observations about Maha and Mocha, uh, and about the weaknesses and risks to be sobering, but regrettably also plausible and correct. And it was a thoughtful and grounded framing. It prompted me as an economist to think about how this conversation intersects with my own fields. So let me just offer a few remarks, interpreting your analysis through that lens, through the lens of economics, and I'll make just three brief points to complement your excellent presentation. So the first point is, um, and this is going to sound intuitive to you and most of your audience, but health and public investments in health, they critically shape economic outcomes. There is a strong and growing body of evidence, and it's just popped up over the last 15, 20 years, but it's a really interesting literature about how health is a fundamental determinant of economic outcomes, not only for individuals, but for society as a whole. And like I said, I think that probably feels intuitive to you, to any clinician who sees the impact of health challenges on functioning. Um, what's especially exciting in economics is that this is an empirical literature. It's very rigorous, and it just documents that public investments in child health, particularly for disadvantaged populations, generates measurable long run returns. And part of the fascinating part of this literature is that they are finding, this influences economic outcomes decades later. So children, for example, whose families have access to programs that support health directly or indirectly, are more likely to complete school. They're more likely to enter the labor force. They're likely to achieve higher earnings. And these are not just kind of gains for the individuals who are affected. They translate into gains for everyone. They translate into, higher productivity for the country as a whole, more tax revenues, less reliance on public support, and I think a more cohesive society kind of generally. And I just think it's striking how little, as you pointed out, that the MAHA assessment emphasizes the social determinants of health, like poverty, trauma, housing, education, nutrition. From an economic perspective, these things are not just background factors or random context. They're just core infrastructure for building human capital and long run economic strength. So that's point number one. But then I want to do kind of the countervailing point that economics, the relationship runs the other way. So economic policy is a determinant of health outcomes. And this is going to be kind of a broadening of your point about how, yes, we'll be doing MAHA and it's crowding out other things. Um, so so you laid out the implications of that. I want to go big and connect this conversation with the current fiscal proposals. So now I'm really going to put on my economist hat here, but there's this major bill moving through Congress right now that would extend the 2017 tax cuts. And kind of there's like a whole bunch of provisions, but most of what it's doing is kind of extending these tax cuts with most of the dollar benefits accruing to higher income households. Much of the cost of this bill will be financed by federal borrowing. I'll come back on that point, but the degree to which it's financed by quote unquote savings will mostly come from cuts to Medicaid. And that is just horrible. There's an economist at Yale named Natasha Sarin. She just had a nice op-ed in the Washington Post, where she estimates that the resulting drop in Medicaid coverage could leave 11 million more Americans uninsured a decade from now. So that's just tragedy. And then if you apply the economics literature based on the ACA Medicaid expansion, this is another really interesting branch of the literature. It's very rigorous. Natasha projects that this could lead to 100,000 additional deaths 10 years out, and that's going to be mostly among low-income individuals. These are just the direct effects. Because of the additional borrowing that I talked about, the Congressional Budget Office forecasts a federal deficit of 7% of GDP by 2026. That's probably not a number that you think about a lot. But let me just say, as an economist, this is a level of deficits that we just don't see in this country. We don't see anything like it unless we're fighting a war, a bad recession, or a pandemic. Federal debt is projected to be $3 to $5 trillion higher a decade out because of the additional borrowing. And this is where I kind of just want to tie into what you were saying about kind of the shifting priorities, the trade-offs. These outcomes, they'll no doubt constrain future investments in health and social services. So no doubt it's going to, you talked about things that are we can see now that are being crowded out, but there are going to be so many more things that are crowded out because of the lack of fiscal space. And on top of that, these kind of huge deficits, they may end up creating economic or financial stability that would in turn kind of have its own effects on public health. So again, I'm building on the worries you had about the opportunity costs that come with the realignment of priorities and what happens when we pull funding from areas like HIV or suicide prevention to pursue more ideological driven research agendas. Um, just again, from an economist perspective, there are going to be real and measurable consequences, not just for health, but for kind of the broader economy, workforce outcomes, and national well-being. And then my last point is about um, data, because this is actually within the field of economics. This is one of the things that I'm passionate about. The data infrastructure that's essential to understanding and advancing health policy is really at risk. So I know this sounds technical, but it's absolutely essential. Our ability to link and analyze administrative and survey data to assess policy impacts, including kind of what's going on right now in this very turbulent policy environment. Um, the important studies I mentioned earlier, all of them, and just a kind of a vast literature on how health and child health affects adult success, they were only possible because of these federal data sets like tax records and education files and Medicaid claims, which allow us to observe long run effects across kind of systems. You highlighted this erosion of trust and expertise, and this data, this disappearing data problem, it is kind of, I think, one manifestation of this. And I think, some of it is the administration pulling data sets, but some of it is that people are just going to be less likely to respond to government surveys in this environment. The fiscal strains that I talked about before that are going to squeeze social programs, they're also going to squeeze our already stretched statistical agencies. I'm hearing reports now, and this is very disturbing, that some state governments are now becoming reluctant to share data with federal partners because of privacy concerns, which unfortunately are well-founded. So there's a real threat to the evidence base we rely on to understand things and for policy makings. So
Mhm.
um, on that note, let me just
Mhm.
kind of close out my remarks so we can take a few seconds or a few minutes for questions. Just on a personal note, I don't want to be totally depressing. I just want to say to you, Franco, that it's just been a real privilege to watch you bring together all these insights from what's been a really long journey to get you to this point. But I just think that, this presentation is an example of kind of your strength as a thinker and kind of, the interdisciplinary background you have to make you a force for good in my field and in your field and far beyond it. So
Thank
with
you.
that,
And
um,
do
that
you
ends
mind if I interject briefly?
Yeah, sure.
Since we have been telling of a very troubling tale, I I I w- I want to tell the audience or suggest to the audience that because this document really attacks our profession, this is actually really a great opportunity. Um, because in a way it gives us a voice or a spotlight that we don't normally have. And I really think that we should have conversations about how we take hold of this moment and try to use it for good.
I certainly agree that there's a lot of spotlight on your field. You mentioned earlier this general diminishment of trust in expertise. That's something I've been wrestling with a lot. I think so I agree with you. We should not sit back and let someone else speak. I think there were too many people who have been counting on either financial markets or big business to fight back in this
Mhm,
environment, and it's hard to do with the attack on, for example, universities. But I
mhm,
do think this is the moment for experts to speak up, and some of this loss of expertise is a complicated thing. We can't go into a full conversation about why it's occurred, but I really do think it is, we need to speak to the country, because I think this is all symptomatic of a kind of feeling, among some voters, or a very large number of voters, that the system, whether it's the economic system or the healthcare system, isn't working for them. And so I think we need to kind of be speaking out about, no, well, this is here is these are the important things that have occurred as a result of this important set of systems that we've built in this country.
mhm.
So, yeah, it's a hard thing. There's one specific question that came up in the
Yeah.
Q&A that I wanted to just ask you. Carrie Bearden weighed in when you were giving your presentation about the different arguments that the Maha report is making. And I think she made an entirely correct observation that kind of the most kind of telling way to tell whether our healthcare system is broken or sick is based on kind of, international comparisons. And she asked about comparisons of costs of the same procedure or medications in the US or other countries. And I was curious too, does the report go there? I know I know there are economists who weigh in on this, but and people in your profession who do this too, but does the report draw on anything like that?
No, not exactly. The comparisons it makes to other countries uh are I mean, it does just talk generally about healthcare spending, but it doesn't get more granular. But interestingly, when it talks about ADHD, um, it talks about how have so many more that it basically tries to pin the rise in diagnosis on ADHD on like say that that's a uniquely American phenomenon because other countries don't prescribe as many stimulants. But that's faulty logic because other countries don't know, in most other countries, they aren't legal to prescribe. It's very difficult to prescribe them. So like it compares the fact that the US has prescribes 19 times the amount of stimulants as Japan does. I couldn't check that statistic. I didn't have time. But even if it's true, well, yeah, Japan, it's very hard, right, for a doctor to prescribe a stimulant. That's not common practice. And that this is a unique feature of the US and a few other countries.
I think you're illustrating again why, we need serious experts to basically, be speaking to these issues and not relying on artificial intelligence to write our reports. Let me just ask you, I know we're short on time. This will be my last question. One more thing, just thinking again more broadly about the administration's policies, and you touched on this with your moment of silence at the beginning of this um, presentation. Another major policy initiative is reducing immigration and deporting immigrants. And one of the reasons I teach macroeconomics is because of the profound human costs, especially those borne by children, that can result from um, the uncertainty and instability that is associated with kind of recessions and bad policy generally. And I just was curious to get your thought. I mean, it just seems like when I think about uncertainty and instability, it seems like what's going on with immigrants in this country. There's going to be even those that don't suffer deportation, there's going to be fallout. So I was wondering if you could just take a minute to talk about how you expect the immigration crackdown to affect the mental health of foreign-born children and the children of foreign-born families more generally.
Yeah. I mean, uh, I don't have specific data on this, but just thinking about trauma and what's happening. Um, I mean, there will not only be, of course, profound effects on the children who are uh, whose parents are being deported, but there will be profound effects on everyone in their community, all of those children, because it's very frightening uh, for a child, for an adult, even for someone in your community to be suddenly taken away. And for a child to experience that, it it's, uh,
Yeah. Well,
in
sure. I mean, tying
yeah,
it back to what you said before and what I said, I feel like um I think you came from a place of like even given like the challenges we just have today, we're heading into a bad period between the priority shifts and the squeezing of programs. But I feel like the underlying challenges that we're going to need to address are going to get even bigger because of fallout from these other things. Unfortunately, we are past the time we were supposed to end, so we do need to end now. Franco, again, I want to kind of congratulate you and just tell you how fantastic it is that you have, already accomplished so much, and that you'll be going out to do even more work to benefit um, to benefit people and their communities. So thank you again, and thank you for inviting me. And thanks to everyone who attended and stuck with us.
thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Dinan. It was such a pleasure to take your class at the Kennedy School.
Okay. So bye, everyone.
Mhm.